All right, let's start today with sort of an audience question. I think it's a good one. This is exactly the type of question I love to answer. A viewer who I guess goes by the name Smash wrote to me about the 2020 election and said, "Dear David, you believe the 2020 election was not stolen and there is no evidence to the contrary. What would you accept as evidence? What would it take to convince you it was stolen? Hope you can answer these questions. Thanks." This is a fair question because I would be a hypocrite, and I don't want to be a hypocrite in front of all of you fine folks, if I demanded that sort of consideration from others. What evidence would change your mind? And then refuse to answer or explain it myself. And remember, very often, if the answer is there is no evidence that would change my mind, you're not really thinking. So, what evidence would change my mind? The first thing, whenever you have a conversation like this, and maybe this will be useful to some people, when we say evidence, what are we even talking about? And so, to be very clear, for me to be convinced that there was an orchestrated voter fraud or election fraud wherein Donald Trump was the real winner, but Joe Biden stole it, I would need evidence of some kind of systematic voter fraud. So the fact that we found a bunch of Republicans, a dozen or so, who either voted twice. There's the guy who's a junior and he voted for himself and for his dad senior, who is no longer alive. Or we find, a Democrat that voted legally via absentee ballot and then died by election day. Like, none of those things are proof of systematic fraud. And not only do they not rise mathematically to the theft of an election from Donald Trump, it's also just like a random person. OK, so that's the first important thing. We are looking for evidence of systematic voter fraud here. And I would even go further and say systematic voter fraud that would have materially changed the results in at least one state. Not even the entire thing, but at least one state. Okay. There are two types of claims that the proponents of these conspiracy theories often make. The first type of claim is that sometimes the big lie people will make a claim that something happened, and that thing did happen, but it just isn't actually voter fraud, even at the individual level, never mind some kind of systematic voter or election fraud. So I'll give you an example. They say hundreds of thousands of people were registered in two places, or usually it's like at the state level, they'll say tens of thousands of people were registered at two different addresses. That's not evidence of any kind of fraud. It's not a crime. It's really common that when people move, they remain registered at the old place. If they showed up and tried to vote at the old place, they would be allowed to, but they also might be registered at the new place. As long as you don't vote twice, there's no issue and there's no crime. So all of the allegations from the right about things that are true but aren't actually a problem, those I don't consider evidence of voter fraud because they're quite literally not fraud. Another example is they say state legislatures changed voting rules without altering the state constitution. Well, that's true, but that's legal. You might not like it. You might disagree. But under the public health emergency of COVID in 2020, there were state legislatures that voted without altering the state constitution to expand absentee ballot or whatever. It's not a crime. It's not illegal, and it's not evidence of voter fraud. So that's one bucket. Things that happened but aren't actually evidence of voter fraud. Those don't change my mind. All right. Then we get to the claims of anomalies, your preference. OK, like, for example, hundreds of thousands of people didn't really vote, but they show up as having voted. There has been no proof of those claims. There just has been no proof of that. So if you can bring to me proof of some kind of systematic requesting and submitting of absentee ballots by someone, and you've got to tell me who the someone is, without the knowledge of the actual voter, in more than this minute number of cases where it seems to be a paperwork error, then that I would consider that substantial. If you were in, and it can't be, we don't know who did it, and we don't know who the people are, but here's three people who say I got an absentee ballot, but I didn't ask for it. Okay, there were places that just sent them out. That's not fraud either, okay? So if you can come to me with evidence that, listen, we have found an IP address from which 100,000 absentee ballots, 10,000, 20,000, something, were requested en masse, sent somewhere, intercepted by someone who filled them all out and sent them all in. Oh, now we're talking about something. We do not have that. Proof of people voting in multiple locations. That I would be interested in. Not just you're registered in 2 places. Not illegal. Trump's daughter, Tiffany Trump, that applied to Tiffany Trump. It applied to Mark Meadows. That's not actually against the law. If you had actual forensic digital evidence of voting machines being used in a nefarious way, you've got Mike Pillow talking about the machines, and you've got all these claims about Dominion did this, no proof. Smartmatic did that, no proof. Okay. If you present actual evidence that we can subject to a digital forensic specialist who can say, hey, you know what? Here's proof. Here is proof of the manipulation. Here's 10,000 people who tried to vote for Trump and their votes were counted for Biden. That has not been presented. Okay. Felons voting in large numbers on purpose, mobilized by someone, right? Like 5 felons voting illegally because they either didn't know they weren't allowed to vote or even deliberately, right? That's not actually evidence of fraud at any real scale. It wouldn't make a difference in even a single state. And there's no evidence that it's coordinated by anybody in the election fraud sort of mode that these Republicans claim. The other thing is you have to explain to me how the relationship between the population of a state, the known number of registered voters, the number of people that turned out, and very importantly, remember, the people that voted presidential and down ballot, there is complete coherence between the presidential vote counts and the votes for Senate or House, etc. If there were some coordinated voter fraud of this kind, you would expect that if they just messed with the presidential voting alone, there would be this completely out of sync, these out of sync results between presidential and Senate or House or whatever. The margins are completely reasonable in all of these. And the Republicans never like to explain, well, I won my election legally on the same ballot in which it was stolen from Trump. Oh, so the ballots, only some of the votes were fraudulent, but the down ballot stuff, it's completely incoherent. One of the important themes or ideas I think that's worth mentioning here is something that Dr. Stephen Novella writes about in his, I forget the name of the book. It's like Skeptic's Guide or something like that. It's called Anomaly Hunting. And very often you will hear, actually the perfect example is the umbrella man from the JFK assassination. And Dr. Novella talks about this in his book. After the assassination of JFK, pictures turned up with a guy holding an umbrella on the grassy knoll or, on the side of the parade route at which John F. Kennedy was killed. And you had people who started to say, it was a sunny day. There's no reason someone would have an umbrella. And so they start to build up a picture that goes something like, what are the odds that we have a presidential parade and the president is assassinated and we're told this story of a lone gunman up in the window and there's a guy with a huge umbrella on a sunny day right alongside where JFK was killed. He must be involved because that's so anomalous. But as Dr. Stephen Novella explains, the question should be a different one. The question should be, because that does make it sound nefarious in some way, but what if you reframe the question and you said, what are the odds that at a presidential parade with so many attendees, you find someone who looks out of place for no particularly nefarious reason? When you ask it like that, a guy with an umbrella doesn't sound so sinister. And of course, we later found out that the guy with the umbrella was a political protest. I believe it was a political protest against maybe Robert Kennedy. I don't remember exactly. So you have to also understand that, if I said to you, look at this thing that happened, that's a 1 in an 8 million chance, you would say, oh my God, that's got to be, something is going on there. Something is acting on that. 1 in 8 million things are so rare. New York City has 8 million people. That means every single day there could be a 1 in 8 million occurrence, and it would be mathematically expected. And so a lot of this stuff that these people look for is sifting through data to find something that sounds unlikely. But the reality is that when you have however many million votes we had, 170 million, 180 million, more, less, something, you can find seeming anomalies and they don't really mean anything. Okay, so hopefully that gives a sense of what I would accept as proof that the 2020 election was stolen. One of our sponsors today is BusyBox Child. I know that there are many parents in our audience. This is for you. BusyBox Child offers really great subscription boxes for kids filled with sensory toys that will help your toddler to elementary age child stay off screens and do some really interesting stuff. Technology use by kids is at an all-time high, especially after the pandemic. Playing off of screens is really critical for development, for cognitive development, social, emotional well-being for kids. It's an ideal opportunity for parents to engage with kids as well. Carolyn is the founder of BusyBox Child. She's a mom and a child clinical psychologist who designs all the boxes that you receive. BusyBox Child offers monthly sensory kits with different themes for each season, or you can get a monthly sand bin subscription for hours and hours of fun. Check out their mini jars and mini kits for playtime on the go. BusyBox Child is a small business that supports the David Pakman Show. Support them. Go to busyboxchild.com and use the code PAKMAN for 10% off. The link is down below.